Samuel Bennett's hands trembled as he reread the letter for what must have been the 10th time that morning. The paper was worn soft from folding and unfolding, the ink slightly smudged where his thumb had traced over certain words. 4 sentences kept catching his eye, making his chest tight with something he couldn't quite name. Mr. Bennett, I must tell you plain. I am not a beauty. Never have been, never will be. But I can cook better than anyone you've ever known. The stage was due in less than 2 hours. 2 hours until a woman he'd never seen would step down onto the dusty street of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, and become his responsibility. His wife, if he didn't turn her away. Samuel set the letter on the rough wooden table and walked to the window of his small ranch house, looking out over the land that stretched toward the distant mountains. 9 years he'd lived here alone. 9 years since consumption had taken his wife Elizabeth and their infant daughter in the same bitter winter. 9 years of silence so complete it sometimes felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. He was 41 years old and felt ancient. The ranch was doing well enough. His horses had a reputation for being strong and even-tempered, and he could sell every foal he bred. But prosperity rang hollow when you ate every meal in solitude and spent your evenings talking to animals because there was no one else. His younger brother Daniel had finally intervened, practically forcing him to place the advertisement in the eastern newspapers. "You're dying inside, Sam," Daniel had said. "I can see it happening. You're becoming a ghost in your own life." The advertisement had been simple. Rancher, widower, 41, seeks honest woman for marriage. Must be of strong character and willing to work. Montana Territory. He hadn't expected much response. What woman would want to travel to the edge of nowhere to marry a stranger? But the letters had come. A surprising number of them. Most he'd discarded after a few lines. Women asking about his wealth, the size of his house, whether he'd buy them dresses from San Francisco or take them to Denver for shopping. One woman had sent a list of demands that ran to 3 pages. Then came Helen Porter's letter, and it was different from the first word. She hadn't asked about money or possessions. Instead, she'd written about the small things that made up her days: the garden she tended behind the boarding house where she worked as a cook, the stray cat that came to her window each evening, the way the light looked on the river at dawn when she walked to the market. She'd asked him questions that no one had asked in years. What did he value most in life? What made him laugh? If he could change one thing about his past, what would it be? They'd exchanged 8 letters over 4 months, and with each one, Samuel found himself checking the mail with an eagerness he'd thought dead. Helen wrote the way she seemed to think, direct and honest, with a quiet humor that caught him off guard and made him smile. She asked real questions and gave real answers. She told him about losing her parents to cholera when she was 16, about working in kitchens and boarding houses for the past 12 years, about the loneliness of serving food to families while having none of her own. Samuel found himself being more honest with her than he'd been with anyone, even Elizabeth. He wrote about his failures as a husband, about being so focused on building the ranch that he'd forgotten to build a marriage, about how Elizabeth had been gentle and good, and how he'd somehow made her lonely even when they were in the same room. He promised himself that if he ever had another chance, he would do better. But then this letter had arrived 3 days ago, and it had kept him awake every night since. Helen's handwriting had been less steady than usual, as if her hand had shaken while she wrote. "Mr. Bennett," it began, formal after months of using his first name. "Before I arrive, you must know something, and you have every right to send me back on the next stage if you choose. I am not a pretty woman. I'm plain as a post, and that's being generous. I'm 28 years old with mousy brown hair that won't hold a curl and a face people forget the moment I leave a room. I know you never asked what I looked like, and I appreciated that more than I can say. But it wouldn't be right to let you think you're getting something you're not." Samuel had read those words over and over, feeling something twist in his stomach. But it was what came next that had really struck him. "I'm telling you now so I won't have to see disappointment in your eyes when I step off that stage. You seem like a good man from your letters, Mr. Bennett. I'd rather remember you kindly from a distance than see you try to hide what you feel. But I need you to know something else. I can cook like nobody you've ever met. It's the one gift I have, and I give it gladly. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all a woman like me can hope for, to be useful enough that you'll keep me anyway. The letter had ended simply. I'll be on the Thursday stage. If you're not there, I'll understand. Helen Porter. Samuel picked up the letter again, running his thumb over her signature. His first reaction had surprised him. He wasn't disappointed that she wasn't pretty. He was disappointed that she thought it mattered. Disappointed that someone had made her believe her only value was in being useful. Disappointed in himself for placing an advertisement that made her think he was looking for a transaction rather than a person. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He'd been looking forward to meeting her. Not just any wife, but Helen. The woman who wrote about stray cats and asked him about regrets. The woman whose letters had made him feel less alone for the first time since Elizabeth died. And now she was coming here believing she had to apologize for her face. Samuel. His brother Daniel's voice came from the doorway. Daniel had ridden over early to help him meet the stage. At 36, Daniel was sturdy and practical, with graying hair and a direct manner. He'd lost his own wife to childbirth 5 years back and had no patience for self-pity or foolishness. You ready? I don't know what I am, Samuel admitted. He handed his brother the letter. Daniel read it quickly, his jaw tightening. Lord have mercy, he said quietly. Someone hurt this woman bad. You think I should send her back? Daniel looked at his brother like he'd lost his mind. Why in God's name would you do that? You just thought wrong. Daniel's expression softened. Sam, Elizabeth was beautiful, and you failed her anyway because you didn't know how to see what mattered. Maybe try looking at someone's heart instead of their face this time. The words stung because they were true. Samuel grabbed his hat and followed his brother outside to the wagon. The ride into Silver Creek took 30 minutes through the summer heat, and Samuel spent every moment trying to figure out what he would say. How did you tell someone you weren't disappointed when they'd spent their whole life learning to expect nothing else? Silver Creek wasn't much of a town, a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of other buildings. The stage stop was in front of the hotel, and a small crowd had already gathered. News traveled fast in small towns, and everyone knew Samuel Bennett was collecting his mail-order bride today. The stage rolled in right on time, dust billowing from the wheels. Samuel's heart hammered so hard he felt dizzy. The driver climbed down and opened the door. A merchant stepped out first, then an elderly couple, then a young cowhand. Samuel was starting to think Helen had changed her mind when one more passenger appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, and Samuel got his first look at Helen Porter. She was exactly as she'd described herself. Brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, average height, wearing a plain gray traveling dress that had clearly seen many miles. Her face was ordinary in every conventional sense, not ugly, not beautiful, just plain. But her eyes caught him. Gray-blue eyes that were intelligent and wary and kind all at once. Eyes that had seen disappointment before and were bracing for it again. She climbed down carefully, clutching a worn carpet bag in one hand and a large covered basket in the other. She looked around the small crowd until her gaze found his. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Samuel saw her shoulders straighten, saw her chin lift slightly, like a soldier preparing for battle. She walked toward him slowly, stopping a few feet away. You're Samuel Bennett. Her voice was quiet but steady. Yes, ma'am. I'm Helen Porter. She paused, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. The letter I sent, it wasn't to give you warning so you could refuse me. It was so I wouldn't have to see disappointment in your eyes when I arrived. She met his gaze directly. Thank you for not showing it, even if you feel it. Samuel felt every eye in town on them. This moment mattered. Whatever he said next would set the tone for everything that came after. He thought about all the polite reassurances he could offer. But Helen had been honest with him. She deserved honesty back. Ma'am, he said clearly, loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear. I've been disappointed many times in my life. Disappointed in myself more than anyone. But I'm not disappointed today. He gestured to the wagon where Daniel waited. I'm glad you came. Real glad. Now let's get you home. Helen didn't speak much on the ride to the ranch. She sat beside Daniel in the wagon bed while Samuel drove, her basket balanced carefully on her lap. Daniel tried to make conversation, asking about the journey and the weather back east, but Helen's answers were brief and polite. Samuel understood. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for him to change his mind. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a solid house with a wide porch, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Horses grazed in the near pasture, and the mountains rose blue and majestic in the distance. It's bigger than I expected, Helen said quietly. It was the first thing she'd said without being asked. Been here 12 years, Samuel replied. Built most of it myself, with help from the hands. When they pulled up to the house, Marcus, the ranch foreman, came out to help with luggage. He was a weathered man in his 50s who'd been with Samuel from the beginning. He tipped his hat to Helen. Ma'am. Welcome. Thank you, Helen said, clutching her basket tighter. Daniel showed Helen inside while Samuel and Marcus brought in her single carpet bag. The house was clean but sparse. Samuel had never been one for decoration, and after Elizabeth died, he'd seen no point. The furniture was practical and sturdy. The rooms felt empty despite being lived in. Helen stood in the main room, taking it all in. Samuel watched her carefully, trying to read her expression. She wasn't judging, he realized. She was calculating, figuring out what needed doing, where things should go, how to make this house work. I'd like to start supper, if that's all right, Helen said suddenly. It's been a long day, and I imagine everyone's hungry. You don't need to cook tonight, Daniel said kindly. You just arrived. I can ride back and have my housekeeper send something over. I prefer to cook. Helen's voice was firm but not unkind. I need to start earning my keep right away. Samuel saw Daniel open his mouth to argue, then close it. He understood what Helen was doing. She was establishing her value immediately, showing them why they should keep her. It made his chest ache. Kitchen's through here, Samuel said, leading the way. Helen set her mysterious basket on the counter and looked around. The kitchen was functional but basic: a cast iron stove, a pump for water, shelves with minimal supplies. She opened the pantry and Samuel saw her mentally cataloging what was there. Flour, beans, some salt pork, coffee, sugar. Basic staples. The kitchen of a man who cooked to survive, not to enjoy. This will do, Helen said. She turned to Samuel. How many for supper? Just the 3 of us tonight. Marcus and the other hands eat in the bunkhouse. Helen nodded and started unpacking her basket. Samuel watched in fascination as she pulled out items he'd never seen in a frontier kitchen: small cloth bags of spices, a jar of something dark and aromatic, dried herbs he couldn't identify, a small bottle of vanilla extract. Where did you get all that? Daniel asked, curious. Collected them over the years, Helen said, already measuring flour into a bowl. Traded for some, bought others when I could. A good cook needs more than salt and pepper. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, and Samuel saw her earlier nervousness vanish as she fell into familiar work. She was comfortable here, in command. This was her domain. Samuel and Daniel retreated to the main room, leaving Helen to work. 45 minutes later, she called them to the table. Samuel sat down and stared at what she'd placed before him. It wasn't the simple fare he'd expected. The salt pork had been transformed into something savory and rich, cooked with herbs that made his mouth water. There were biscuits, light, fluffy, perfect biscuits somehow produced in a strange kitchen with minimal ingredients. The beans were seasoned with something that made them taste completely different from anything he'd ever eaten. He took a bite and stopped. Just stopped. It wasn't just good. It was extraordinary. The flavors were layered and complex, each one distinct but working in harmony with the others. He looked up at Helen, who was watching him with those careful, guarded eyes. Daniel had taken a bite too. Good Lord, he whispered. Helen, where did you learn to cook like this? The compliment seemed to startle her. Practice, she said simply. I've been cooking in kitchens since I was 16. This isn't just practice, Daniel pressed. This is art. A faint flush colored Helen's cheeks. When you're playing, you learn other ways to make people notice you. Food makes everyone happy if it's done right. Samuel wanted to argue with that, wanted to tell her she was wrong about herself, but something in her expression stopped him. This wasn't the time. Instead, he said, Thank you, Helen. This is the best meal I've had in more years than I can count. That small smile appeared again, transforming her plain face into something warm and genuine. You're welcome. They ate mostly in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of people enjoying something too good to interrupt with unnecessary words. When they finished, Helen immediately stood to clear the plates, but Daniel stopped her. You cooked. I'll clean. That's the rule now. Helen looked like she wanted to argue but finally nodded. She excused herself to the small bedroom off the kitchen that would be hers until the wedding, which they'd planned for the following Sunday. After her door closed, Daniel began washing dishes. That woman has wounds, he said quietly. Deep ones. You still want to marry her? Samuel thought about the letters, about the woman who wrote of stray cats and loneliness, about the way she'd smiled when he'd praised her cooking, like she was starving for any scrap of appreciation. More than before, he said. More than before. That night, Samuel lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling. Down the hall, Helen was in her room, probably wondering if she'd done enough to be allowed to stay. The lingering smell of her cooking still filled the house, and for the first time in 9 years, the place felt less like a tomb and more like a home. He told her the truth at the stage stop. He wasn't disappointed. But now he realized something else. He was hopeful. For the first time since Elizabeth died, Samuel Bennett was actually hopeful about the future. And it scared him half to death. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a careful dance. Helen transformed the house, not with decoration, but with life. The kitchen became the heart of everything. Samuel's ranch hands, who used to eat quickly in the bunkhouse, now found excuses to linger near the main house around mealtimes. The smell of bread baking or stew simmering drew them like a magnet. Samuel watched Helen work and started noticing things. The way she hummed softly when she thought no one was listening. How she saved scraps for the barn cats and left out water for the birds. The small herb garden she'd started beside the kitchen door, nursing tiny plants with the same care most people reserved for children. She was making the ranch into a home, doing it so quietly you almost didn't notice until it was done. They talked more now, in the evenings after supper. Nothing deep at first, just the small exchanges of daily life. How the horses were doing, whether they needed supplies from town, what the weather might bring. But sometimes in those conversations, Samuel caught glimpses of something more. Helen would mention a book she'd read, and her whole face would light up. Or she'd tell a story from her childhood, and he'd hear the girl she'd been before life taught her to make herself small. He tried to show her he was paying attention. When she mentioned missing the sound of rain on a tin roof, he made sure to leave her window open during the next storm. When she said she'd always wanted to see the mountains up close, he offered to take her riding up to the high meadows. Small things, but he saw her notice each one. Saw the surprise in her eyes, like she couldn't quite believe someone was listening. Sunday came, and they were married in the small church in Silver Creek. Helen wore a simple blue dress she'd made herself. Samuel wore his best suit, brushed clean of dust. The ceremony was brief, witnessed by Daniel and a handful of townspeople. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Samuel hesitated, unsure. But Helen looked up at him with those steady gray-blue eyes, and he leaned down and kissed her gently. It was chaste and brief, but it was a promise nonetheless. After the ceremony, there was a small gathering at the church. Helen had baked for it, of course, rolls and pies that made people stop talking mid-sentence when they tasted them. The women of the town complimented her cooking, though their smiles were tight. The men were more effusive, praising every dish loudly. It was when they were loading the wagon that Samuel overheard it. Two women standing close enough to be heard, probably on purpose. "That plain creature Bennett married," one said. "Though I suppose when you're desperate, you take what you can get." The other laughed. "At least she's useful. That's something." Samuel saw Helen's back stiffen. She didn't turn around, just kept loading the basket into the wagon with mechanical precision. He opened his mouth to say something, to defend her, but the moment passed. The women walked away, and Samuel hated himself for his silence. On the ride home, Helen was quiet. Too quiet. That night she was polite but distant, and the next day, and the next. The ease they'd been building disappeared behind a wall of formal politeness. "Yes, Mr. Bennett." "Of course, Mr. Bennett." "Whatever you think best, Mr. Bennett." Daniel noticed immediately when he came by 3 days later. He cornered Samuel in the barn. "What did you do?" "Nothing." "That's the problem." "Then fix it." "I don't know how," Samuel admitted. The words felt like failure. "I don't know how to tell her those women were wrong without making it worse. I don't know how to make her believe she matters." Daniel's expression softened. "You're doing it again, Sam. You're staying silent when you should speak. Don't let it happen twice." But before Samuel could figure out what to say, everything changed. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the fancy carriage rolled up to the ranch. Samuel was checking a fence line and didn't see who it was until he heard Helen's gasp from the garden. A well-dressed woman had stepped down from the carriage, staring at Helen with wide eyes. "Helen Porter? Is that really you?" Helen had gone white as milk. She dropped the herbs she'd been picking. "Mrs. Whitmore. I can't believe. After all this time," the woman said. "You disappeared completely." She moved closer, and Samuel saw there was nothing friendly in her smile. There was cruelty there, deliberate and sharp. "So this is where you ended up. A ranch wife in the middle of nowhere." Samuel walked over, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "Oh, you must be the husband. How delightful." Mrs. Whitmore looked between them with open amusement. "Has she told you about Boston, Mr. Bennett? Has she told you about my son William? About their little romance?" The word dripped with contempt. "Please don't." Helen's voice was barely a whisper. But Mrs. Whitmore continued as if Helen hadn't spoken. "My son, foolish boy, thought himself in love with our cook. Can you imagine? He actually proposed marriage to her." She laughed. "Of course, we couldn't allow such nonsense. A woman like that, thinking she could marry into our family." Samuel felt his jaw clench. Daniel had come out of the barn, and Marcus had stopped working, both of them listening. "We were quite creative in making him see sense," Mrs. Whitmore went on. "Had to make it clear what happens when people forget their place. And Helen learned her lesson, didn't you, dear? Learn that women like you are meant to serve, not to be loved." "Not really." Helen's hands were shaking. She looked at Samuel, and he saw everything in that look: the fear that he'd see her the way these people had, the certainty that she wasn't good enough, the old wounds bleeding fresh. "That's enough." Samuel's voice came out harder than he'd intended. "You need to leave. Now." Mrs. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "I was simply being honest. Surely you deserve to know what kind of woman you've married." "I know exactly what kind of woman I've married," Samuel said, his voice like iron. "Now get off my land." The woman's face flushed with anger, but she climbed back into her carriage and left in a cloud of dust. The silence she left behind was deafening. Helen stood frozen for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice empty. "I should have told you. I'm sorry. Helen, I was a cook for the Whitmore family in Boston. Their son William was kind to me. Made me feel like I mattered. Said he loved me." She laughed bitterly. "I was stupid enough to believe him. When he proposed, his family was horrified. They couldn't have their precious son marrying the help." She looked at Samuel directly now, tears streaming down her face. They made sure I understood my place, Mr. Bennet. Made sure I knew that women like me don't get happy endings. We get what we deserve, which is nothing." Her voice broke. "I learned my place, and I won't forget it again." She walked past him into the house. Samuel heard her door close, and he stood there feeling like he'd failed again. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about Helen's face when that woman had spoken, thinking about his own silence at the church social, thinking about how he was doing exactly what he'd done to Elizabeth, letting someone suffer alone because he didn't know the right words. The next 2 days were torture. Helen was polite and efficient, but she'd retreated so far behind her walls that Samuel couldn't reach her. She cooked, cleaned, worked harder than ever, but she wouldn't meet his eyes, wouldn't talk beyond bare necessities. It was like living with a ghost. Then disaster struck. One of the foals got tangled in wire fencing in the far pasture. Samuel had to ride out at dawn, and what should have been a quick rescue turned into a crisis when he discovered several more horses had broken through a weak section of fence. He spent 2 days and nights tracking them down, repairing fences, dealing with injuries. By the time he got back, he'd barely slept or eaten and felt like he'd been dragged behind a horse. It was past midnight when he rode in. The house was dark except for a lamp burning in the kitchen window. When he walked in, he found Helen sitting at the table, waiting. "You didn't have to stay up," he said. "I know." She gestured to the counter. "There's food. Cold chicken, bread, things you can take tomorrow. I packed it already." Samuel looked and saw she'd prepared enough food for days. His clean work clothes were laid out. In a saddlebag by the door, he could see she'd packed other supplies. "What's that?" he asked. "Extra bandages, liniment, things you might need." Her voice was flat, mechanical. "I know you forget to take care of yourself when you're busy." Something in Samuel broke. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was 2 days of thinking about everything wrong in his life. But suddenly he couldn't hold it in anymore. "Helen, I can't do this." She stood up quickly, her face going pale. "I understand. I'll pack my things." "No." He moved toward her. "That's not what I meant. I can't do this dance where we pretend everything's fine when it's not. I can't watch you make yourself invisible because you think that's what I want. It's what everyone wants," she said quietly. "It's not what I want." Samuel sat down heavily in a chair. "Helen, I don't know how to do this. Elizabeth was my first wife, and I failed her completely. I was so scared of feeling anything that I felt nothing. She was lonely in a house with a husband, and I let it happen." Helen was staring at him now, really looking at him. "When you wrote those letters," Samuel continued, "about stray cats and gardens and being lonely, I laughed for the first time in 9 years. I looked forward to checking the mail like a kid at Christmas. And when you arrived, I wasn't disappointed because you weren't pretty by some ridiculous standard. I was disappointed because you thought it mattered to me." "How could it not matter?" Helen's voice broke. "It matters to everyone. Not to me. Not about you." Samuel rubbed his face. "But I'm doing the same thing I did before. Staying quiet when I should speak. At that church social, when those women said those terrible things, I should have said something. I should have told them they were wrong. I should have told you that you matter." "I'm used to it," Helen whispered. "You shouldn't have to be." He looked at her directly. "Helen, do you know what I see when I look at you? I see the woman who leaves seeds out for birds. Who started a garden her first week here because growing things makes you happy. Who stays up past midnight to make sure a tired man has food for tomorrow. I see someone who makes this house feel like a home instead of a tomb." Tears were streaming down Helen's face now. "You don't have to be kind." "I'm not being kind. I'm being honest." Samuel stood up. "I know we're already married, but I'd like to court you properly if you'll let me. I want to start over. I want to prove to you that I see you. Really see you." "I don't know if I can believe that," Helen said, but her voice held something it hadn't before. "Hope. Then let me show you." Samuel took a step closer. "Let me prove it. Give me a chance. Helen looked at him for a long moment. What else do you remember from my letters? The question caught him off guard. What? You said my letters made you laugh. What do you remember from them? Samuel thought about the stack of letters he kept in his desk drawer, the ones he'd read and reread until he'd nearly memorized them. You wrote about missing fireflies. About how your mother used to make apple butter every fall and the whole house would smell like cinnamon. You said your favorite season was spring because it meant things were growing again. You asked me if I believed people got second chances because you hoped they did. Helen's breath hitched. You remember all that? I remember everything, Samuel said quietly. You wrote that you dreamed of having your own restaurant someday. That you wanted to cook food that made people happy, not just fed them. You asked me what I regretted most, and I told you about failing Elizabeth. You didn't judge me. You just said that knowing you failed meant you could do better next time. I can't believe you remember, Helen whispered. How could I forget? Those letters were the best part of my days for months. Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to move away. When she didn't, he took her hand. Helen, I'm not good with words. I'm going to mess this up 100 times. But I'm asking you to give me a chance. Let me court you properly. Let me show you that I see you. Helen looked down at their joined hands. I'm scared. Of what? Of believing you. Of hoping. Every time I've hoped for something, it got taken away. She looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. What if this is just another mistake? Then we'll make it together, Samuel said. But Helen, I don't think this is a mistake. I think maybe this is the first thing I've gotten right in a very long time. They stood there in the lamplight, the exhausted rancher and the woman who thought she was invisible. Outside, the first hints of dawn were touching the mountains. Okay, Helen whispered. Okay, we can try. Samuel squeezed her hand gently. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to try. Samuel courted her properly after that. He asked about her day, her thoughts, her dreams. He reread all her letters and asked follow-up questions that made her blush. Small gestures appeared, wildflowers on her pillow, her favorite tea ordered from town, the squeaky kitchen door finally fixed. Helen slowly opened up like a flower facing the sun. One evening, washing dishes side by side, she whispered, I always dreamed of having my own restaurant. Samuel dried a plate carefully. Why not here? Why not now? Who'd come eat food cooked by a plain woman? He set down the plate. Everyone who already finds excuses to visit, Helen. Half the territory's been angling for dinner invitations since you arrived. The idea took root. Helen decided to host a harvest dinner in town, a free meal in the square for everyone. Samuel supported her fully, helping prepare tables, spreading word. It was a risk, exposing herself to judgment again. But the evening arrived cool and golden, and the town turned out, skeptical but hungry. Sarah's cooking spoke for itself. Her roasted chicken, butter rolls, apple tarts that melted on tongues. People began seeing her differently, not because she changed, but because they were finally paying attention. The local preacher stood, tapping his glass. His blessing became a short sermon about seeing as God sees, not by appearance, but by heart. This woman has fed us body and soul tonight, he said. Later, women who'd been cold to Helen approached with awkward apologies. Some were genuine. An older woman with kind eyes took Helen's hand. Took me 40 years to believe I was beautiful, dear. Don't take 40 years. After most had gone, a wealthy rancher from the neighboring county approached. Silver-haired, confident, expensive clothes. Mrs. Bennett, I'm Henry Morrison. I'd like to fund you opening a Rio restaurant. Proper building, equipment, staff. Helen felt Samuel tense beside her. Morrison continued, You'd have full control, naturally. I'd just provide capital. 20% partnership. The old Helen would have leaped at the offer. But she looked at Samuel's tight jaw, remembered William and his family, saw the test in this moment. Mr. Morrison, she said clearly, I appreciate the offer. Truly. But if I build this dream, I'll build it my own way. Slowly, properly. Morrison raised his eyebrows, then smiled slightly. Admirable. Offer stands if you change your mind. He tipped his hat and left. Samuel released a breath. You didn't have to turn him down. Yes, I did. Helen turned to him. Some things are worth building together, even if it takes longer. He pulled her close right there in the town square and kissed her, not tentatively this time, but with the certainty of a man who'd finally learned what mattered. Together, he murmured against her hair. Together, she agreed, finally believing it. 6 months later, a small building stood at the edge of town. A hand-painted sign above the door read, Helen's Table. Samuel had named it, said it perfectly captured what she did, made space for people, fed them more than just food. The restaurant exceeded every expectation. It wasn't fancy, gingham curtains, mismatched chairs, tables that wobbled slightly. But Helen's cooking made all that irrelevant. People came from neighboring counties. The plain woman with magic hands, they called her, and she'd learned to smile at it. Helen had transformed, not in appearance but in presence. She carried herself differently now, quiet confidence replacing hunched shoulders. She'd stopped apologizing for taking up space. One afternoon, a stagecoach arrived in the square. Helen watched from the restaurant window as a young woman stepped down, mousy brown hair, nervous hands clutching a wrinkled letter. Another mail-order bride. Helen's chest tightened with recognition. The girl looked around, terrified, as the driver pointed toward the hotel. She moved like someone trying to be invisible. Helen untied her apron. Mind the counter, Samuel. I'll be back. She caught up with the girl outside the general store. Excuse me. You just arrived? The girl, startled, nodded. Up close, she looked barely 20, eyes red from crying. I'm Helen Bennett. I run the restaurant across the street. You look like you could use a meal before whatever comes next. The girl's face crumpled with relief. I told him I wasn't pretty in my letter. I don't know if he'll still want me when he sees me. Helen's heart broke and mended simultaneously. Come with me. Samuel Rose had been on the Whitmore Ranch for 3 nights, and each sunrise carved him a little deeper into Helen's world whether she meant it to or not. He rose before the first hint of blue touched the horizon, long before the chickens muttered or the horses stamped the sleep from their legs. He liked the quiet out here, the way the darkness loosened its grip slowly, the way the cold bit clean and honest. He had lived his life in noise. This, whatever this place was, felt different. Helen noticed. She noticed everything. From the loft window of the barn, she watched him haul a fresh bale of hay over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. He moved with a deliberate steadiness, not showy strength, not the puffed-up swagger so many men used to impress her. Samuel simply worked. He bent to the earth as if he respected it. And that unsettled her in a way she didn't want to examine. He wasn't supposed to be staying this long. She had told herself the first night would be the last. Then, when he woke coughing from the cold and feverish from exhaustion, she told herself one more night wouldn't hurt. Then she found him fixing the south fence without being asked and decided another day was fine. Now he'd been here long enough that his bedroll looked at home beside the barn wall. Helen didn't like things becoming at home. Her life had too many ghosts already. She descended the stairs, boots on wood echoing through the barn. Samuel straightened, dust on his forearms, straw caught in his hair. Mornin', ma'am, he said, voice quiet in that respectful way of his. You don't need to call me ma'am, she replied. You don't need to call me ma'am, he echoed softly, almost a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She rolled her eyes before he could see the way her lips almost betrayed her. Breakfast in 15, she said. Don't be late, or Charlotte blamed me for it. Charlotte, now that was another problem entirely. Her youngest sister, only 21, sharp-tongued, intelligent, unshakable. And entirely too curious about the mysterious stranger sleeping in their barn. Samuel wiped his hands on his trousers. Yes, Helen. He said her name carefully. Like it meant something. Like he'd been waiting for her to allow it. and she hated the way that warmed her chest. Charlotte Whitmore was already seated at the breakfast table when Helen entered the kitchen. So was Emma, their middle sister, stirring the pot of oats on the stove. The Whitmore ranch belonged to the three women now, ever since their father passed and their mother followed him 6 months later. They ran the place with a discipline most men in the territory couldn't muster. "What's the weather?" Charlotte asked, not looking up from the newspaper she definitely wasn't reading. She was peering over it toward the doorway, waiting for Samuel to appear. "Cold," Helen muttered. "As usual. Samuel coming in for breakfast?" Emma asked, tone neutral, but Helen knew her middle sister well enough to hear the curiosity beneath it. "He is," Helen said, pouring coffee. "Don't start." Charlotte smirked. "Start what? The man looks like he walked straight out of a dime novel. I'm just asking questions. He's here to work for a few days. That's it." Charlotte hummed noncommittally. Helen hated how off-balance this whole thing made her feel. She had spent years building walls high enough that even grief couldn't get back in. She didn't need some quiet stranger with a past he wouldn't name worming his way into the cracks. But when Samuel finally stepped through the doorway, hat in hand, hair damp from washing at the pump, every part of the room seemed to shift. He wasn't handsome in a polished way. Not like the town men who chased Charlotte and tried to win Emma's attention. He was handsome in a weathered, lived-in way. Cheekbones sharp from hunger, jaw rough with stubble, shoulders built by work instead of vanity. His eyes were the part that stood out, calm in a way that didn't match the rest of him. As if nothing in the world could shake that quiet center inside him. "Morning," he said. Charlotte smiled far too broadly. "Well, good morning." Helen kicked her under the table. Charlotte yelped. Samuel blinked, confused. Emma covered a laugh with her hand. And that was the first moment, small, nearly invisible, where Helen realized he had begun to carve a place among them. A place he did not ask for, but somehow filled naturally. By noon, Samuel and Helen rode out to inspect the western pasture, a task she usually did alone. She didn't like company, didn't like anyone hovering over her shoulder, didn't like anyone asking questions. But Samuel didn't hover and didn't ask. He just rode beside her, letting her guide the pace. The wind carried the smell of sage. The horses moved easily across the cold ground. "You run a good place," Samuel said after a long stretch of quiet. Helen didn't look at him. "We do our best." "No," he said. "You do better than that." She swallowed. Praise never felt comfortable. Praise from him felt like something was being pulled loose inside her. "We work hard," she said. "We don't have the luxury not to." He nodded slowly. "I know that kind of life." She glanced over. "You speak like a man who's lost something." For the first time since she met him, something flickered across his face. Pain. Deep and fast, before he masked it. "We all lose things," he said. "Some losses stick harder than others." Helen wanted to ask more. She didn't. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Before she could decide whether to push, a sound cut the air, a distant, rolling thunder of hooves. Helen's head snapped toward the ridge. Riders. 3 of them. Fast. Her fingers tightened around the reins. Samuel noticed immediately. Trouble? Could be. But she already knew. Only one group of men rode like that around here. Braxton Kane's boys. Kane was a land baron with ambitions bigger than his brains. He'd been circling the Whitmore ranch for months, trying to buy them out, pressure them out, scare them out, anything to get his hands on their water access. The Whitmore land had the best groundwater in the region. Kane's land didn't. That made the Whitmores a problem. And Kane wasn't a man who tolerated problems. Samuel shifted in his saddle, sensing the tension. "You want me to fall back?" "No," Helen said. "Just stay." The riders came close enough for their voices to carry. "Well now," one called. "Look what we found." Helen exhaled slowly. "Don't talk unless I tell you to," she murmured to Samuel. He gave a small nod. The men reined in their horses a few yards away. All armed. All smirking. "Afternoon, Miss Whitmore," the leader said. Helen forced a polite tone. "Afternoon, Mr. Tooley." His eyes slid toward Samuel. "Didn't know you hired help." "Hired for a few days. That's all." Tooley grinned. "Funny. Kane said you weren't looking to bring in new hands? But I guess things change." Samuel's posture didn't shift, but he was watching everything: Tooley's hands, the men behind him, the spacing of the horses. Helen recognized the look. A man who had seen violence. A man who had survived it. Tooley spit into the dirt. "Kane wants me to remind you that his offer still stands," he said. "Ain't wise to turn him down. Not with winter coming." Helen kept her voice flat. "We're not selling." "A shame." Tooley leaned forward in his saddle, grin widening, "Meaner now. Tell your sisters we'll be stoppin' by soon to talk it over proper." Samuel's jaw tightened. Helen's chest went cold. "You'll do no such thing." Tooley laughed. "We'll see." The men turned and rode off. Only when they were gone did Helen release the breath she'd held. Samuel looked at her, something new, something dark, settling in his eyes. "That man mean what I think he meant?" Helen stared after the riders. "Yes," she said quietly. "He did." Samuel didn't look away from her. "Then you need more than a few days' help." She turned her horse toward home, voice steady but trembling underneath. "We don't need saving, Samuel." "I didn't say you did." "Then what are you saying?" He met her gaze without flinching. "That I'm not walking away." Helen's heart jolted. She didn't know him. She didn't trust him. She didn't want him here. But when she looked into his eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safer. Samuel woke before dawn, long before the chickens began their fussing or the cattle stirred in the lower pasture. A pale blue light hovered over the horizon, and the air carried that Montana chill that sank into the bones before the sun rose high enough to burn it off. He swung his legs over the side of his cot, scrubbed a hand down his face, and listened to the quiet of the ranch house. No footsteps. No clanking pans. No Helen. He expected her, if not bustling, then at least awake, already pushing herself too hard for a woman who hadn't asked for help and didn't want to admit she needed it. He stepped into a hallway and noticed it immediately: the bathroom door slightly ajar, steam on the upper panel, and a faint, low sound, like breathing that was too controlled to be natural. He knocked once. "Helen? You all right?" A pause. A soft exhale. Then her voice tight. "I'm fine." He knew enough lies in his life to recognize one by tone alone. Samuel eased the door open an inch. "You ain't invincible." "I said I'm fine." He opened the door properly this time. Helen sat on a small wooden stool, hair damp, knuckles pressed into her knees. The steam wasn't from a bath at all. It was from a cloth she'd heated in the sink, now tossed aside. Her face was pale, drawn tight around the eyes, and her right shoulder was trembling. Not shaking, trembling. Samuel stepped inside and lowered himself to one knee. "What happened?" She looked away. "It's nothing. You're hurt." "Samuel." He reached without thinking, brushing his fingers near her shoulder but stopping short of touching her. "May I?" She was too tired to argue, too proud to admit it. She gave a stiff nod. He loosened the collar of her work shirt just enough to see the upper arm and shoulder. A bruise bloomed dark and violent beneath the skin, dull purple at the edges, almost black in the center. No ordinary bruise. Not one caused by tripping or lifting something heavy. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "Who did this to you?" Helen didn't answer, and that silence told him everything. Not only was she hiding it, but she feared the consequences of speaking it aloud. He stood, fighting the urge to pace. "Helen, I ain't asking to be nosy. I'm asking because someone hurt you. And I'm here. You don't have to carry this alone." She breathed out slowly, like someone forcing themselves to stay steady. "It was yesterday morning." Before you came out to check the fences. I went to town early to get some things from the mercantile. He waited. Her hands tightened in her lap. He was waiting for me behind the store. Marcus Hale. Samuel felt every muscle in his body go rigid. He knew the name. Every ranch hand, ranch owner, and drifter in 100 miles knew that name. Marcus Hale wasn't just a bully. He was a man who'd built a reputation on cruelty. A man who wanted the Whitmore property for himself, who didn't believe a woman should own a damn thing, and who thought intimidation was a tool. What did he want? Samuel asked quietly. Helen swallowed. He told me the same thing he told me last month. That the ranch isn't safe with just me. That I should sell the property while I still can. He put his hand on me to make his point. Samuel's voice dropped to a low, restrained gravel. He touched you. He grabbed my arm. Hard. She looked up at him finally. Samuel, please don't do anything reckless. Reckless? He forced himself to breathe, to stay level. You think standing by while a man lays hands on you would make me anything but a coward? I don't want more trouble, she said softly. I can handle him. No, Helen. You've been handling too much for too long. Silence again, heavy, tired. He pulled the stool closer and lowered himself until he was sitting across from her. She didn't flinch this time, didn't retreat into that hardened shell she normally wore like armor. You're strong, he said. But strength don't mean going through hell alone. For a moment, something in her expression cracked, just barely, but enough to see the woman beneath the hardened ranch owner. A woman worn down by years of holding everything together by herself. Samuel, she whispered. Why are you doing this? He blinked once. Doing what? Caring. His throat tightened unexpectedly. Because someone should. Her breath caught, and she looked down at her bruised shoulder as if seeing it from a new angle. Maybe for the first time, she didn't see it as a private burden she had to hide. He reached again, slowly, gently, and this time she didn't stop him. His fingers brushed lightly over the edge of the bruise, careful not to cause pain. I'll wrap it properly, he said. You won't even be able to move your arm wrong by accident. Her voice softened. You know how to do that? I know more than I want to, he murmured. She held his gaze. For a moment, either of them looked away. Then she nodded. All right. Samuel rose and gathered what he needed from the small cabinet, a strip of cloth, salve, fresh bandaging. Every movement was controlled, focused, because the alternative was picturing a man's hand gripping her arm hard enough to leave marks. And that thought made his blood run hot. When he finally finished wrapping her shoulder, she let out a breath that almost sounded like relief. Thank you, she whispered. You don't owe me thanks. His voice was low. Just honesty. Her lips parted like she might say something more, but then the back door slammed open downstairs. Both of them jumped. Footsteps thundered inside the ranch house, fast and frantic. Then a voice. Helen! Samuel! You need to come see this, now! It was Elijah, the youngest ranch hand, nervous, skittish, not the type to shout unless something was very wrong. Helen pushed herself to her feet with a wince. Samuel caught her elbow, steadying her. Easy. I'm fine, she muttered, though much less convincingly now. They hurried downstairs, both sensing the shift in the air. Something outside was wrong. When they reached the porch, Elijah pointed toward the barn. Or rather, what remained of it. A section of the eastern wall had been smashed inward, wood splintered, beams cracked, hay scattered across the ground like someone had torn through it in a rage. Samuel's stomach dropped. But the damage wasn't what turned his blood cold. It was the smell. Smoke. Oil. And underneath it, the sharp, metallic scent of blood. Helen froze beside him. Elijah stammered. It wasn't like this last night. We checked everything before turning in. Samuel stepped forward, scanning the debris, the ground, the tracks. Boot prints. Deep ones. Made by a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Helen whispered. Marcus. Samuel didn't deny it. Because this wasn't random vandalism. This wasn't an accident. This was a warning. And something told Samuel it was only the beginning. The men stood in silence for a moment, the cold morning air tightening around them like a noose. Samuel stepped forward, boots crunching on splintered wood as he examined the damage. He crouched near the broken section of the barn wall and brushed his fingers across the shattered beam. The surface was rough, torn by brute force. Someone had struck it with something heavy. A tool. A post. Maybe even the blunt end of a rifle. Then he noticed something half buried in the hay. A metal rivet from a boot. Fresh. Unworn. The kind that didn't come from ranch hands or cowboys, but from the expensive leather footwear of a man who wanted to make a statement. He didn't show it to the others yet. Helen came up behind him, her breath unsteady. How bad is it? Samuel rose slowly. Bad enough that this wasn't done by some bored drunk looking for trouble. Elijah swallowed hard. Do you think he'll come back? Samuel didn't look at the boy. Yes. Helen drew in a sharp breath, almost imperceptible. We can fix the barn, she murmured. That ain't the point, Samuel said. Her eyes flashed. Then what is the point? That he thinks you're alone. Samuel's voice was even, steady. And he thinks nobody's gonna stand between him and what he wants. Helen glanced away, jaw tightening. I don't want this turning into bloodshed. That decision ain't up to you anymore, Samuel said quietly. He made the first move. She didn't argue, but she didn't accept it either. Not yet. Elijah shifted nervously. I can go to town, fetch the sheriff. No, Samuel said it fast. Too fast. Helen turned sharply. Why not? Sheriff Moore's been in Marcus Hale's pocket for years, Samuel said. Everybody knows that. Helen exhaled, defeated but not surprised. Then what do you suggest? Samuel finally showed her the object he'd picked from the hay. He held it up between two fingers, gleaming, barely dirted. A boot rivet. Custom made. Decorative. Expensive. Helen's face went still. That's his. Yes, Samuel said. And he dropped it on purpose. Elijah blinked. Why would he do that? Because he wants her to know, Samuel replied. Wants her to see it. Wants her to feel hunted. The boy's face paled. Samuel turned back to Helen. He's sending a message. She stared at the damaged barn, fists clenching. That coward! He ain't a coward, Samuel said. A coward hides. A man like Marcus Hale? He wants to be seen. Wants you to feel him breathing down your neck. Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. I won't let him take this ranch. Samuel stepped closer. Then you need to let me do what has to be done. She looked up at him, her brown eyes steady, defiant, but carrying a tremor underneath. And what exactly are you planning? First, Samuel said, we rebuild the barn. Make it stronger than before. Prove he can't break what's yours. Helen nodded. Second, Samuel continued, we make sure he understands you ain't alone. That if he wants to try again, he's gotta walk through me. Her breast shuddered. Elijah looked between them, wide-eyed. Should I get the other hands? Yes, Samuel said. Wake them all. We start patching this immediately. Elijah sprinted off. Samuel and Helen were left standing together in the cold, the ruined barn towering over them. The wind stirred loose hay across the dirt, carrying the faint sting of smoke and oil. Helen wrapped her arms around herself, partially to ward off the cold, partially to hide the strain. Samuel saw through it anyway. You should rest that shoulder, he said. Let the others handle the heavy lifting. I can't stand around while my property is being fixed. I won't. He studied her expression, the fire, the pride, the stubbornness. It was one of the reasons he admired her already. But it was also what would get her hurt quicker than Hale ever could. You lead, he said. You don't need to lift boards to show that. Her lips parted slightly, surprise softened. Before she could answer, the crunch of hooves sounded from the road. Not a gallop. Not the easy trot of a rider passing through. This was deliberate. Slow. Measured. Heavy. Both of them turned toward the sound. A rider approached on a broad-chested Palomino stallion, dust rising beneath the horse's feet. The sun, still dragging itself up over the horizon, cast a long shadow behind him. Samuel felt his pulse tighten. Helen's face strained of color, but her jaw set hard. Marcus Hale. He didn't ride like a cowboy. He rode like a man who believed the land surrendered beneath him. Tall. Sharp features. Cold eyes that never smiled. And clothing too fine for any honest work, dark coat, polished boots, gloves that had never touched cattle. He stopped a few yards from the ranch house and swung off the horse, tying the reins to the post like he owned the damn place. Helen, Hale said, voice smooth as poison. Looks like you've had yourself a bit of misfortune. Helen stepped forward. Get off my land. Now, Hale said mildly. No need to be hostile. Just came to check on you. After all, word travels quick in these parts. Samuel moved to stand beside her. Hale's eyes slid to him, assessing, calculating. You must be the new hand. Samuel, isn't it? Samuel said nothing. Hale smiled slightly. I've heard things about you. Stranger from back east. Quiet sort. The kind who doesn't stay in one place too long. Still, Samuel didn't speak. Hale stepped closer to Helen. You know, you and I could have avoided all this. A woman alone can't keep up a place like this. It's too big. Too demanding. You're struggling. Everybody can see it. Sell the ranch. I'll pay more than what it's worth, and you can move on with your life in town. Helen didn't blink. I'm not selling. Hale shrugged. Suit yourself? But I'd hate to see things get worse. Samuel's voice finally cut through the cold morning air. Last warning, he said. Leave. Hale turned to him slowly. Or what? Samuel didn't move. You don't want to find out. For the first time, Hale's smile faltered. Only a fraction. But enough. He stepped back, lifted the reins, and mounted the stallion. This conversation isn't over, Hale said, gaze narrowing at Samuel. Not by a long shot. He turned the horse and rode off without another word, dust curling behind him. When he was gone, Helen let out a breath she'd been holding. Samuel didn't look at her. He kept staring at the empty road where Hale had disappeared. Because he knew that wasn't a visit. It was a declaration. And trouble was coming for the ranch, fast and mean. The rest of that day passed in a blur of hammering, sawing, lifting, and rebuilding. Every ranch hand threw himself into the work with a kind of quiet fury, because everyone knew what the damaged barn meant. Nobody said Hale's name. They didn't have to. It hung in the air like smoke. Samuel worked harder than all of them, but not recklessly. Every swing of his hammer was controlled, deliberate, purposeful. He wanted Hale to feel this defiance from miles away, wanted the man to see that his warning had landed on rock, not sand. Helen refused to withdraw to the house. Even with her wrapped shoulder, she moved from one part of the project to the next, checking measurements, steadying boards with her good arm, directing the men. Samuel watched her more than he meant to. She wore exhaustion like she wore grief, quietly, refusing to let it break her. As the sun slipped toward the horizon, the barn repairs were nearly done. Not perfect, not as good as new, but strong enough to stand. Strong enough to send a message. When the men finally dispersed for dinner, Helen remained outside, staring at the barn with a distant look. Samuel wiped his hands and approached her. You should sit, he said softly. I'm all right. No, you're not. She didn't argue this time. He led her to the porch steps, and they sat side by side as twilight folded over the land. The mountains blushed purple, the grass shimmered in gold, and the air filled with the lonely sound of crickets. For a long while they didn't speak. Then Helen broke the silence. He's going to come back tonight. Samuel didn't deny it. Yes. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. He won't get it. She looked at him then, really looked at him. You don't know what he's capable of. Doesn't matter, Samuel said. I know what I'm capable of. A faint tremor shivered through her, not fear, but the weight of everything she'd been holding alone for years. Samuel, if you stay, you'll get hurt. I've been hurt before. I don't want you to be. The sincerity in her voice tightened something deep inside him. For a moment, the ranch faded away, the broken barn, the coming storm, the years of grief that had carved lines into her face. There was only her. Quiet. Strong. Worn down, but not broken. I ain't leaving you, Samuel said. Her breath caught, soft and fragile, like something she wasn't used to letting slip. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't touch her. But the space between them shifted, something unspoken settling in the air. Then a sound cracked through the evening. A branch snapping. Not far. Not close either. Helen tensed, eyes darting toward the tree-ling. Samuel rose slowly. Stay here. Samuel. But he was already moving, hand drifting toward the rifle propped against the porch railing. He walked toward the sound, footsteps steady, breath even. Another snap. Lower. Closer. He stepped past the outer fence, and into the thin line of shadow where the tall grass met the early night. Come out, he said. Silence. Then a shape moved. A man stepped into the open, hands raised lazily, as if he were approaching a card table instead of trespassing on another person's land. Marcus Hale. Evenin', Samuel, Hale said. You rebuild quick. Samuel leveled the rifle at him. Don't take another step. Hale smirked. You really think you scare me? I don't need to scare you. Samuel's voice was calm. Just need to stop you. Hale's eyes gleamed with something cold. You think you're doing her a favor? That woman's drowning. You're just delaying the inevitable. Samuel didn't move the rifle. You're done. You won't come near her again. Hale chuckled. Or what? You'll shoot me? On her behalf? For a ranch that ain't even yours? Samuel didn't blink. Try me. For the first time, Hale hesitated. Only slightly, but enough for Samuel to see the flicker of uncertainty. And then another voice cut through the dark. Marcus. Helen stepped into the fading light, her silhouette sharp against the porch lantern. Hale turned, and his face changed, not fear, not shame, but something uglier. Obsession. Helen, he said, voice lowering. You and I need to speak, just the two of us. No, she said. Hale stepped toward her. Samuel cocked the rifle. Don't. Hale froze. Helen walked forward, stopping halfway between the two men. Her shoulder trembled, but her face was carved from iron. I'm done with your threats, she said. This ranch is mine. My family built it, and I will die before selling a single inch of it to you. Hale's mouth twitched. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, she said. I do. Her voice shook, but it shook with conviction, not fear. You hurt me. You damaged my property. You think fear makes you powerful. But it doesn't. It just makes you small. Samuel saw the moment Hale snapped. Hale lunged. Samuel didn't think, he moved the rifle but collided with Hale's jaw before the man could reach her. Hale staggered, grabbing at Samuel's coat, but Samuel shoved him back hard. Hale swung wildly. Samuel ducked, caught his arm, and drove a knee into his ribs. The man folded with a grunt. But he wasn't done. Hale drew a knife. Helen gasped. Samuel stepped between them as Hale slashed, but he caught Hale's wrist mid-swing, twisting until the knife clattered to the dirt. Hale screamed. Samuel shoved him down again, this time not letting him rise. He pinned the man with a forearm across his chest. This ends tonight, Samuel said. Hale spat blood. What, are you gonna kill me? No, Samuel said coldly. But you're leaving Montana. And if you so much as step foot on this property again, I won't stop at breaking your arm. Hale saw it then, The resolve, the strength, the man who had nothing left to lose but the people he chose to protect. Fear finally swallowed him whole. Samuel let him up, but just barely. Hale staggered to his feet, clutching his ribs and staring at Helen with the last scrap of his pride. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "No," Helen said quietly. "I won't." Hale stumbled to his horse, mounted clumsily, and rode into the night without looking back. When he was gone, the ranch exhaled. Silence settled. Wide, fragile. Full of everything unsaid. Helen took a shaky step toward Samuel. "You could have been killed. So could you." She looked up at him, eyes glassy, breath unsteady. "Thank you?" Samuel shook his head. "Don't thank me. I have to." He opened his mouth to object, but she continued. "Nobody's stood up for me since my father died. Nobody's stayed. Nobody's cared." Her voice cracked. "I didn't realize how badly I needed someone until you showed up." He swallowed. Slowly, she reached for his hand, her uninjured one, fingers trembling between certainty and fear. He took it gently. She breathed out. "I don't want to be alone anymore, Samuel." He stepped closer, their foreheads almost touching. "You're not." The words sank into her like warmth after a long winter. He raised a hand to brush a loose strand of hair behind her ear, slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. When he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was soft. Honest. A promise more than a gesture. Her good hand curled into his coat, holding him like she'd been holding herself together for far too long. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "What happens now?" she whispered. Samuel wrapped an arm around her, protective but gentle. "Now? We rebuild. We heal. We make this ranch stronger than before." "And us?" she asked quietly. He pressed his forehead to hers. "Us, we take it day by day. And I stay. As long as you want me here." She smiled, a small, tired, real smile. "I want you here," she whispered. He held her close as the lantern light flickered behind them, the night settling warm around their silhouettes. The worst was behind them. The danger had passed. And for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. The end.